Hello, and welcome to Sensational, the special educational needs podcast brought to you by Witherslack Group. My name's Laura, I'm a senior occupational therapist for Group, and we have SEN schools all over the country and support almost 2,000 young people and their families every day. More importantly, I'm a mum of 2 children, one of whom is neurodivergent, and I'm here to host our monthly podcast where I'll be asking our special guests the questions that you and I want the answers to. Whether you're a parent, carer, grandparent or professional, our advice, guidance and practical strategies for you to try at home will enable you to empower your children and your young people. Our regular listeners might be able to tell we've had a bit of a makeover. So for those listening, you can now watch our episodes on YouTube. We really want you to be involved and have your questions answered. So please find us on Instagram and Facebook by searching Witherslack Group or submit your questions via email. A new episode of Sensational will be released on the first Monday of every month, and it'll be available on all podcast streaming services and YouTube. So sit back, relax and enjoy this episode. And if you like what you hear, hit like and subscribe. In this episode, we're joined by Tony Lloyd, CEO of the ADHD Foundation Neurodiversity Charity. And today we're going to be discussing neurodiversity and identity. Welcome, Tony.
Good morning, Laura. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks. And yourself?
I'm pretty good, thank you. Yeah.
I believe you haven't come far today.
No, it's great that we're actually doing this in the Northwest. It's kind of, Yeah,
I'm absolutely delighted. My dad only lives about 15 minutes away, so I'm going to go and see him afterwards. So I'm made up. I'm really
great.
pleased.
Well, I live about 5 minutes away, so that's even better.
So this is our first ever podcast on Sensational.
Great.
Welcome back. I believe you've done this kind of thing before.
Yeah, a few times.
Yeah, okay then.
A few times.
You have to let me off because it's my first time. So
right. Okay.
that's why I've got my cards. So we are going to be talking today about a really important topic. We're going to be thinking about neurodiversity and identity.
Yeah.
And how we can support our families who've got children who are exploring themselves, helping them to advocate for themselves and thinking about those kind of topics. So how can you help us? How can you open the discussion there for us?
Well, do you know one of the things I think is really quite inspiring about young people at the minute is that when I sort of encounter groups of young people and I look at their friendship groups and they are just incredibly diverse. You have young people of black skin, brown skin, Chinese origin, mixed race, white, middle class, working class, gay, straight, dyslexic, autistic. They are so embracing of difference and so accepting of each other's humanity in a way that my generation just wasn't. And I know that for a lot of parents who are listening in today, their recollection of what are called special needs children was really quite negative. When I was at school, the special needs children were in a porter cabin behind the sports hall. We were the rest of us were told, well, they're not like us. They're less intelligent, they're less able, or they don't know how to behave. So there was that kind of moral judgment, or there's something medically wrong with them. And that's basically why within the school system that I grew up in, that was how we justified marginalising those children and othering those children and, in a way, abdicating responsibility for educating them the way they learn. And that sort of excuse, well, they're not very bright, we know actually is completely untrue.
So if we're just thinking about difference and neurodiversity and identity and kind of moving things forward, do you see any correlations between neurodiversity and the LGBTQ plus community?
It's a really interesting question, Laura, because I mentioned before about how embracing young people are of diversity, for example. And there was a survey done last year where 53% of Generation Z identify as neurodiverse. And it's interesting that they chose the term neurodiverse rather than neurodivergent. I prefer to identify as neurodiverse rather than neurodivergent. And the reason for that is that if you look at the dictionary, the word neurodivergent derives from deviant, deviating from the norm. And if everybody's brain is as unique as their fingerprint, then what constitutes the norm out of 7.5 billion people on this planet where nobody looks the same or sounds the same and everybody's brain is as unique as their fingerprint? So apart from that one person in the middle of the 7.5 billion, everybody's deviating from the norm. So I prefer the term neurodiverse, and I don't. I know there are some people that prefer the term neurodivergent. That's up to them. I know a lot of young people prefer the term neurodiverse, or just I am autistic, or I am ADHD. I think people have got a right to choose how they self-identify.
And we should ask them as well, shouldn't we? We should be asking.
Like I said, I don't kind of refer to people of colour as racially divergent. I don't refer to people who are in the LGBTQ community as sexually divergent. Why should I identify as neurodivergent when? So I much prefer the term neurodiverse as a self-identifier. But when it comes to LGBTQA, again, this is, not only did this survey say that 53% of young people identify as neurodiverse, we know that in the LGBTQA community, those people who are autistic and ADHD, we see almost double, and I don't know that there's enough empirical evidence yet, but the surveys and research that has been done suggests that while LGBTQA accounts for about 9% of the population according to the last census, it's double that if you are neurodiverse or ND. So in the surveys that we've done, in the ADHD population, 18% of people identify as LGBTQA. And in the autistic population, it's slightly higher again. So I think we live in the age of identity now, Laura. I mean, I don't know kind of how it is for your daughter. When I kind of, again, young people, they seem much more values driven than my generation. They are much more socially aware. They're very concerned about climate and social justice in a way that my generation of young people never was. And I think that's a good thing. And they are also much more embracing of diversity in terms of sexual orientation and relationships, and don't kind of adhere to that sort of very traditional concept of human sexual orientation being binary. You're either gay or you're straight. Well, it's not quite that simple. No. And can be fluid. And for a lot of young people growing up, particularly in adolescence, it can be a challenging time for growing up because you've got this adult body and you're still you've still got, the mind and the brain and the experience of a child. But your brain doesn't reach full maturity till you're 25. But from a reproductive perspective, your body does by the time you're about 15. So it can be challenging. And for a lot of young people, understanding their sexual orientation in the context of healthy relationships isn't always clear cut. And thankfully now, I think because we see more visibility around people who identify as LGBTQA, it's okay, if you're gay or you're straight or you're asexual or you're bisexual, whatever it might be. Whereas when I was a young person, there was, and I growing up as a gay man in a very homophobic world, it was another fear that you had, that you didn't feel safe, that you didn't belong, that you would be rejected if people knew. And we're a social species. We all belong to social groups, don't we? We all, and when you're young at school, your friendship group is the most important thing in the world because you learn to understand yourself and your identity around, the social group that you belong to. The most exciting part of being a teenager was, Friday night, wasn't it? Going out with your friends. I used to sort of say to young people, how much time do you spend preparing yourself for when you've got to do homework or an exam? And they look at me. I said, well, how much time do you spend preparing your Friday night? And they said, well, it starts on Saturday morning. The motivator for them is their friendships. And it's, I think, one of the things that I'd like to see more of in education is how we educate young people to be effective communicators and respectful, considerate human beings who know how to treat other human beings well. And I think we assume that all happens at home. But when you think that for young people, their friends are their biggest influence, I think it's a tough gig, isn't it, for parents trying to help their parent, for parents try and get their child to understand that, kindness, respect, compassion, acceptance of people who are different, all of these things are so important to your happiness and the happiness and well-being of others.
Yeah.
That I think, I think growing up and understanding your sexual orientation and your sexual identity is tough for anybody. I think if you've also got that difference of neurotype, autism, ADHD,
the way your brain is processing
makes
things,
it a little bit more
tricky.
difficult because you're not always understanding other people the way you think you are. I mean, I kind of have a real talent. My husband's talking to me, and I can be talking to him, and I think I've finished the sentence in my head. He said, "Tony, you stopped halfway through. You're going to tell me the rest." Really, and I think also as well, for some people who have a very literal understanding of the spoken word, the subtle nuances of courtship and dating, I think it's a minefield, isn't it? Everybody can remember their first experience of a crush or falling in love with somebody at school. And it's tough on, it's tough on young people going through that, but that's part of growing up.
Yeah. So you did touch on it earlier about, you said it's a tough gig for parents, but have you got any advice or help on how, when a neurodiverse child is coming to you and talking about exploring their identity and sexuality, anything that you can say to parents to help with those conversations and how you help your child to explore that safely? That's
easy. You just tell them how much you love them, and it doesn't matter at all what their sexual orientation is, as long as they treat other people respectfully and that they understand what is appropriate and inappropriate, and also age-appropriate behaviour around intimate relationships and things like that, and safety, and that you explain to them that it can be difficult, but that you love them, and actually whatever their sexual orientation is actually quite irrelevant to the fact that they're your child and you love them. So what?
Yeah.
It's what you want as a parent is for your child to be happy and fulfilled, and no child is going to be happy and fulfilled if they grow up and enter into a marriage when actually their sexual orientation is not sort of heterosexual, for example. That's not fair on anybody. It's not fair on them. It's not fair on the person they marry. It's not fair on their children. What matters is that we're honest and authentic. And when we're honest and authentic about who we are, then we're likely to be happier, we're more likely to thrive, and we're more likely to treat other people the way that we should do, with kindness and respect.
And I don't think that advice just applies to neurodiverse
children,
of course not. To everybody. That's advice for everyone. There you go.
Yeah, and young people, even if your child is heterosexual, they're going to have friends who are gay, bisexual, lesbian. It's that thing about, what matters, isn't it, is somebody's humanity and whether they're a decent person, and as I say, authentic. That's crucial. So for parents, it is just about, I love you no matter what.
Yeah. If there are some parents out there who are struggling to kind of start that conversation with their young people, have you got any advice about how to?
That's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's
I can imagine it is.
Because your child might not want to talk to you.
No.
Your child might be embarrassed. Your child might have all these preconceived ideas about, are you going to judge me? But I also think that for many children, their parents have friends who are gay and bisexual. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of us about. Yeah. And I think it is just that thing about, growing up in a culture and environment where it's okay, and that there are children out there who are in families where they have two dads or two mums, and that is okay. What matters is that you come from a loving home, first and foremost. So I think for parents wanting to start that conversation, sometimes it's not about starting the conversation in relation to sexual orientation. It's just about, so have you started dating yet? and boy or girl, that just kind of, as in it's irrelevant, which, and the thing is for a lot of teenagers, a lot of young people, and even right up until their early 20s, might have relationships with people of either gender as part of their kind of exploration of their own sexual identity. And I think what we've got to accept is that however we enculturate children and socialise children, adults are who they are when it comes to their sexual orientation. The element of choice is about how you treat people. I think is the crucial thing. So I get that for parents, it's not an easy conversation to start, but I think the easiest way is, so if you started dating yet, have you had your first crush yet, was it a boy or a girl, just straight away, you're making it clear that it doesn't matter to you as their parent what their sexual orientation is, as long as they're a decent human being and they know what is appropriate and inappropriate and kind and respectful.
I could ask you loads of these questions. I could go on forever, but I believe that we've got some questions from, you hosted a webinar for us.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the LGBTQA community, and we had loads of questions in. I wonder if we could just take a minute to,
sure.
In our new section, take a minute to ask some of the questions from our families from that webinar. Yeah. So our first question is, I have a 15-year-old son who has autism and ADHD and is questioning whether he's transgender. This is a new development which we are struggling to navigate. Do you have any experience of this and any advice how best to approach the issue? A lot of advice I've seen is targeted at neurotypical children.
It is a very kind of difficult thing, isn't it, for parents? Because when somebody is questioning not just their sexual orientation, but their gender, that's quite difficult, isn't it? You're saying, well, I don't know whether actually that I belong in the body that I have. And I don't know what that's like, because I'm not trans or non-binary. And I can only imagine it must take a lot of courage for anybody to say something that has been historically such a socially taboo issue, all I can say to parents is, again, just keep reminding your child that you love them no matter what, and that they will go through a process where eventually their sexual orientation and their sexual identity will become clear to them, however long that takes, and that it's okay. And I think just accepting where their child is at that particular point, because a week later, a month later, a year later, they might have a very different sense of identity, and then they might not. What matters is they're your child and you love them, and all you can do is tell them that whoever they are loved, and that, that you're there with them and will support them. I think the biggest concern for a parent of a child who's autistic, and particularly autistic ADHD combined as well, is that, we mentioned before, dating and intimate relationships is a bit of a minefield when you're young. You don't have the benefit of hindsight. You don't necessarily have the self-regulation or maturity. You're very vulnerable to being hurt. You're very vulnerable to being hurt as an adult in intimate relationships, never mind as a child. I think the question has got to be, if you are going to have a physical intimate relationship with somebody, then it's really important that you're able to talk to somebody else about how you stay safe and about how you interpret other people's behaviour, and understand that dating has a lot of nuances, and, we don't always get it right in terms of understanding other people's intentions. That people can be very insecure and very frightened when they develop feelings for other people. There's research that proves that, you can become physically clumsy when you're in love because of your brain chemistry. It can be quite a daunting experience. I think for any parent, it's, well, I want you to be safe. Is there anything that you'd like to ask me? I don't want you to be embarrassed. But if you are embarrassed, is there anybody else that you can talk to so that you can be safe, that you can make sure that how you treat other people is safe, appropriate, and kind. But I think it is important that young people have the opportunity to be able to talk. I think young people talk to each other quite openly. And I think sometimes it's okay for parents to say, well, if you've got a close friend, you want to have that conversation. Do you want your friend here and we'll have that conversation together? And because I think the more open and honest children can be, the safer they will be. And I say children, you're still a child at 16. When it comes to relationships, you're still a child at 18. A lot of us are still children as grown-ups when it comes to relationships, because it's one of the most beautiful things about being a human being, isn't it? But it's also one of the things that can cause us the most hurt. But it's part and parcel of being human. And I think it's, any parent who can help their child navigate that successfully is a good parent.
Yeah. I suppose space for self-advocacy as well, being able to learn what you need, what helps you in a relationship, and being able to communicate that to keep yourself safe as well is super important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the caveat I would add is never, ever, ever say anything intimate about yourself or anybody else online. And never, ever, ever share photographs of yourself.
Have those rules and boundaries very much in place.
That's it. That's the first priority, isn't it? Be safe. Yeah.
Thank you for that. We've got another question. What do you advise for an autistic child who is struggling to understand how they identify in gender? Born female 13 years ago, but struggling with body dysmorphia and wanting to identify as he, him. No one seems to be able to advise me or school on the best way forward, and I've been told not to go down the pronoun route as they're still so young. This is not helpful when I have a child who wants to identify as male. Have you any advice?
I think you have to take each situation in, on its own merit. I know a number of young people who identify as a different gender to the one that they were born with. They're very happy. I don't know what it's like to be them. I can imagine that it must be confusing and difficult. But I think as a parent, it's got to be, well, okay, mindful that they might not feel this way 12 months from now, but I don't think it's a good time. I don't think it's a good thing to say that. It's certainly not a good thing to say, well, it might be a phase. I think what we've got to say is, well, okay, if that's who you are right now at this time in your life, then that's okay. And if this is what you want to be called, then that's okay. This is your child who is trying to understand themselves and the world they live in. And let's be honest, us grown-ups haven't made a fantastic job of creating a particularly safe world, have we? I think, no wonder sometimes young people are disillusioned with the so-called grown-ups and the responsible adults. That I think it is about just accepting them where they are, without judgment, loving them unconditionally, and reassuring them that you're there to listen and to help them try and understand themselves as they go through that journey. Because, we reach puberty at kind of anything from 9-10 years of age onwards. We don't really properly mature. Our brains certainly don't mature until we're in our mid-20s. It's quite a long period of your life. And, inevitably there are going to be crushes and relationships, and some relationships that become intimate physical relationships. And that's I think sometimes always a bit tough for any parent watching your child grow up, because you know how vulnerable they are to being hurt, for example. You know, and you want them to practice safe sex and have, that sense of responsibility towards others, and I think, it's tough. My only advice I would say to parents is you've just got to remind your child that you're there and that they can talk to you about anything, and that they're not going to be judged or criticised, and you accept them as they are, and that you will walk with them on that journey, wherever it goes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, Tony, I'm going to go back to my card so I'll make sure I get these questions just right for everyone. Okay. How can we address stereotypes and misconceptions as neurodivergence and identity within school to create safer, more accepting environments for our children?
I think the first thing is, could we celebrate that neurodiversity?
Yeah, absolutely.
Make it visible.
Yeah.
Strip away the myths and the stigma about less than, or, naughty children, and all this kind of nonsense and excuses that we use for removing children from a classroom, and abdicating responsibility for teaching everybody. And recognise that everybody learns a different way.
Just brain difference, isn't it? That's what it means, doesn't it?
So things like Neurodiversity Celebration Week at the end of March, which was actually started by young people in the Foundation's youth group.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, that's amazing.
About 9 years ago. The Neurodiversity Umbrella projects that we have, thousands of schools taking part. They have a small umbrella installation in their school.
Yeah, we do that at Witherslack group. Yeah.
Sometimes young people kind of decorate those umbrellas and write about what their talents and abilities are.
And they're so visible. It's such a visible celebration. It's beautiful.
Colourful representation of, your diversity of mind. I mentioned before that at least, these naturally occurring neurotypes like ADHD, autism, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, we know we can't cure them, and nor should we. They are not diseases to be cured. They're not errors of genetics. If 1 in 5 people out of 7.5 billion people have one of these naturally occurring different types of mind, then there's got to be an evolutionary reason why 20% of humankind think differently. It is the universal design that we all think differently. Maybe the reason we all think differently is that we've got something to learn from one another, and that we shouldn't all be thinking the same way. We all know what groupthink does. So I think in schools, it's about make that what was invisible and kept hidden, make it visible. I was talking to a young man who I used to teach many years ago. God, I'm going back now. And I worked as a psychologist, psychotherapist in a school, and led a sixth form. And this young man I encountered in his last year of sixth form, and it was clear to me that he was autistic and ADHD and definitely dyslexic, but it had never been picked up. And he didn't do very well, and went into the world of work, but he eventually decided he wanted to be a teacher. He wanted to make sure that children had a better experience than him. And he had an assessment and was told that he had autism and ADHD and dyslexia. He's now a special needs coordinator in a school.
Amazing.
And the wonderful thing about it is that in a short space of time, all the young people, when he got there in the first term, he stood up in the assembly and told them that he was dyslexic, autistic and ADHD. And he said, I'm not going to ask any of you to stand up and say whether you're autistic, dyslexic. I'm going to ask any of you, if you or one of your friends is autistic or ADHD or dyslexic, will you stand up? And every child in the school hall stood up. And he said it just made him smile. He said, and he has never, ever had any problems with attitude or behaviour or work ethic from a lot of children who were considered to be unteachable. And the parents love him as well. But what's been interesting is that it's been a bit of a challenge for some of his colleagues, because they're like, oh, right, okay, this is a bit odd for us, because we've had an education system that for over a century hasn't really changed that much when you consider how much the world of work and employment and our culture's changed. And those kind of children never became teachers because they were less intelligent, they were less able, they underachieved. And here's one of our colleagues now who is in the management team and the special needs coordinator, who identifies as dyslexic, ADHD and autistic. And I just think that's incredibly powerful.
It is. And I love that story about that assembly. You know, I'll be thinking about that afterwards. Yeah. Really powerful. How can we think about empowering the neurodiverse young people to advocate for themselves and their own unique identities and strengths?
Do you know, Laura, I think, you know, every young person is an individual. You talked about celebrating neurodiversity. I've seen some really funny, entertaining T-shirts that a lot of young people have been wearing. You see a lot of young people now, you know, the umbrella motif, which has become a bit of a kind of a symbol of neurodiversity. I think it's about being open and honest about your particular neurotype. And I think it's just one facet about you. It's like the colour of your hair or how tall you are. It's part of this rich diversity of what it is to be a human being. And I think, you know, if we can encourage children to believe that they are confident, lifelong learners who can apply their intelligences in lots of different ways, in lots of different contexts. We've got to remember in school, mostly what we're focused on is intellectual development and measuring their intellectual progress in an exam at the end of the year. But intelligence is more than intellect. You know, you have emotional intelligence, you have situational intelligence, you have character intelligence. You want to be able to use your intelligence to help you navigate your way through life, your career, through relationships, family life, as an active and responsible citizen, you know, of Great Britain. And in a nutshell, be proud of who you are, take pride in your intelligence, use your intelligence well for the benefits of you and everybody around you.
Perfect. I love that. It's been such an insightful conversation. I've learned loads today. I hope everybody at home, you know, has found it a useful conversation. As part of our new setup, our lovely new glamorous podcast.
Do you
like it? It's great, isn't it?
Whoever thought of that is a genius.
Yeah, it's great. And our new fancy sign. I love it all. So as part of that, we're going to be introducing our section called Words of Wisdom.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you've got any words of wisdom or any thoughts, any kind of inspirational advice that you'd like to leave for our parents or for our young people who might be listening today.
Words of wisdom. I don't know that I'm necessarily the right person to come out with something that could be defined as words of wisdom. I think the only wisdom that really matters is, you know, bringing a young human being into this world is an awesome responsibility, and parenting is the toughest job anybody is ever going to have in their lifetime. And I'd like to say the most rewarding job that they ever have in their lifetime. But I also know that being a parent also comes with worry and anxiety, you know, about wanting your child to be happy and well. But I think the word of wisdom is be there, be available. Because we all lead very busy lives. Parents go to work, they often come home, they're tired. And then, you know, and you know, I've often hit this point, haven't I, you know, they're just so attention seeking. Of course they are. That is exactly how children are supposed to be. Mm-hmm. Children need your attention. Yeah. And we have to be available to them and remind ourselves sometimes, no matter how tired we are, no matter how worried we are, that there's a young human being there that needs you and depends on you more than anything else. And that is the most important thing that you will ever do in this lifetime. I think one thing that I learned as a parent of reframing that attention seeking as connection seeking. Absolutely. And sometimes that really helps, doesn't it? You remind yourself that it's about that connection between you and your child. Be the parent that you always wanted yourself.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for joining us today, Tony, and I hope to see you again soon.
Cheers.
If you like what you've heard today, please hit like and subscribe, and we'll see you again on another episode of Sensational.